Hello, I'm Jim Brewster, Education Coordinator for FamilyTreeDNA. Today we're going to be talking about a powerful set of tools called mtDNA Discover. Now this looks at a particular type of DNA called mitochondrial DNA. So first we're going to talk just about a few key concepts of mitochondrial DNA. The first is that it's a type of DNA that everyone inherits from their mother. So both men and women have it, but only women pass it down to their children. So here's a diagram here where you can see that this maternal ancestor, which is the line that we're going to be looking at, she passes her mitochondria down to both her son and her daughter. But then in the next generation, only the daughter passes it down to the granddaughter. Also passes it down to the grandson, but you can see that the son doesn't pass it down. And that's just because of the way that the embryo is made and the way the DNA inheritance works. So that can give us some valuable information. First off, it means that we can use it to trace the direct mother's line. So that means that everyone who is who shares the same mitochondrial DNA, they can all trace their ancestor back to the same direct maternal ancestor. So none of the male ancestors will influence this, so it's very narrow in its focus, and that can provide some really great advantages. What it can do, first off, is it can provide a migration route. So this is some deep anthropological information that stretches your line back tens of thousands of years. So just like today, people move around. So I live in a different state than the one that my mother was born in. She lives in a different state than her mother was born in, and so on. And so what this does is it allows us to follow those geographic breadcrumbs all the way back to what we call mitochondrial Eve. And that's the person who passed down all the mitochondria that we have today. So it's the person that had daughters who went on to have daughters who went on to have daughters. And we can all, both men and women, trace our ancestry back to mitochondrial Eve. And all the people who share a particular line back to mitochondrial Eve all share the same group of DNA, which we call a haplogroup. So in this diagram here, all of these people share the same haplogroup because they share the same maternal ancestor. So to give you an idea of what this migration route looks like, this is my own haplogroup, which is designated just by the letter U. So you can see here that we have Eve, mitochondrial Eve. Now this is based on archaeological evidence as well as the differences in mutations that we see throughout the world. So in different parts of the world, all different people, they have different mutations. Basically, their maternal ancestor had slight changes in their DNA that got passed down to them generations ago. And as the generations pass, each line grows more of these mutations and they become more unique. So my particular line of mutations, which is called haplogroup U, and that's the mutations that I share with all of the other people in haplogroup U, who all trace this particular ancestral line into Europe, are all part of this haplogroup. So to expand this to the world, this is a bit of a dated example of haplogroups. Science has evolved, we've gotten more specific, but as you can see, there's a lot of different lines here, so it can get kind of confusing to see. So I want to start with just the simplest explanation and then work from there. So we are going to be talking a lot about migration routes and haplogroups in this presentation. So if these are new concepts to you, if terms like haplogroups or the haplotree are new concepts, then I would encourage you to pause this video and go take a look at our YouTube page and take a look at a video called mtDNA Haplotree. This will help explain some of the concepts that we're talking about. So I'll give you a moment to do that. Welcome back to all of you who just paused to look at that video. And away we go. So The mtDNA Discover reports you can access through a public version even if you don't have an mtDNA test with FamilyTreeDNA. If you have a mtDNA haplogroup that you've gotten through some other testing company, you can always take a look at mtDNA Discover. You can just do a quick search for FamilyTreeDNA, mtDNA Discover, and you'll be able to plug in your haplogroup and see a lot of good information about it. But having an mtDNA test with FamilyTreeDNA does unlock a few additional features. So I'm going to be talking about that version of it. But most of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, you can see through the public view too. So that might give you an idea of what it is that you're looking at. I'd recommend that you go play around with it and then go from there. So this is going to be the main page. So this is your haplogroup story. Now, if you're anything like me, seeing a giant wall of text like this might not always be your friend. So there's a lot of different tools in here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about each one of them, or at least some of the most valuable ones for genealogists, since there is a lot here. So first, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at this migration map, since this is something that's now a little familiar to us. So this is going to be a display. It's pretty similar to the one that we talked about a few slides ago. And you can see here that there's this mitochondrial Eve, and that it migrates, in this case, up into Europe. Now, there's a lot going on in here, so let's just go ahead and blow up the section that we're talking about. So now this is a haplogroup called haplogroup H. Now, I chose this one. This isn't my particular one, but I chose this one because it is the most common maternal haplogroup found throughout Europe and throughout people with European ancestry. And it does represent a large portion of our mitochondrial database. So I want to be able to give something that's applicable to as many people as possible, but you can look up your own haplogroup in here. So up here at the top, you can enter whatever haplogroup you have, or one that you're studying, perhaps for a friend or family member or client, and be able to look up that particular migration route. So you can see here that the H haplogroup, it originated down here and in the Middle East area, and it migrated up into Europe, up over around the different mountains, and it, as you can see, it's split off into several different sub-branches in here. So there's the main haplogroup H, but then each one of these lines represents a different ancestor who had some different mutations that were able to trace to split them apart. So you might be asking, okay, like you can tell that they split apart by comparing the mutations that are on them, but how do you know geographically where they are? Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked. We do that in a couple ways. One is that we test living people today, and we see where they're living, where their ancestors lived, and be able to sort of put the haplotree together just through DNA, sort of by doing a compare and contrast, looking, one of these things is not like the others. But then we also are able to sequence ancient DNA. So these are going to be DNA that's found in remains that are usually uncovered in archaeological digs or through other sources. And we're able to use various dating methods to place those in time as well as location. So let's go ahead and highlight some of these. So this one right here, you can see that there's these blue numbers. When we click on one of them, we can see that this is a pretty populous area because there's been a lot of digs. There's been a lot of evidence that's been uncovered and DNA that's been sequenced. So here in this case, we have 3 different locations. Now, these are usually named after the site where they were recovered, and then followed by the name of the individual. So if there were, let's say, 7 individuals that were found at this location that I'm not going to try to pronounce because I will probably do it incorrectly, this was the 7th individual found. There can also be other identifiers. But when you click on any one of them, you can see that it gives you some information. It tells you where they were found, the time period that this individual lived, any cultural group that they're associated with, their haplogroup, and then where you and this individual may have shared an ancestor, as well as the scientific paper or documentation where this information came from. You can also learn more in Ancient Connections. And Ancient Connections is another feature that you can see over here on your left. And when we go to this, it gives us some more information. It tells us a bit of the story of this individual, how rare it is in the database, and it also allows you to look for some of the other ancient connections that you have. So this is pretty neat. You can see here that there's this direct line, but it lived back in 1600 BCE. So there's probably been some mutations that have occurred before then and since then. So you can actually analyze exactly that breadcrumb trail that got put back together through those remains in living day people by looking at your ancestral path. Now again, all of these tools can be found by navigating in the left-hand bar of the menu. And you can see that it puts that in a historical context. So it gives you an age estimate of how long ago it was, when they lived, and the number of descendants that they have based on the size of the database, and just a lot of other really great information. Now, I personally think this is really interesting, and I know a lot of you do. I know that archaeological remains isn't everyone's thing, though, so there are some other tools that we can check out as well. And one of those are going to be notable connections. So these are going to be people who are either living today, famous people who are living today, or historical people. In this case, we have the DNA of Beethoven. This particular one was done through a forensic analysis, but there are other notable connections where we have living descendants or descendants of relatives of that person. So Thomas Jefferson, for example, his DNA was found in that sort of method. So you can see here that you have living people. You also have Gregor Mendel. He could perhaps be one of your connections. He's considered to be the father of modern genetics. He was the first one to really determine a lot of the ways that DNA is inherited. And you can see down here that this includes a timeline as well. Now, the thing that's on the bottom here, the Stone Age, Metal Age, Imperial Age, this gives you an idea of where to put it in a historical context. Now, keep in mind that depending on where your ancestors lived, these time frames may have changed a little bit. But this puts it in a nice historical context. So now, again, you may be thinking, okay, well, this is great, but this is old information. I want to find out about living people today. Well, you, my friend, are in luck, because we also have something called the time tree. So what this does is it's a visual representation of that common ancestor that lived a long time ago, as well as all of the different descendant lines that it has. And over here on the right, these are all of the countries that the people who've tested today, who are in those lines, have reported their maternal ancestor as coming from. So, for example, these people these are living people who tested their DNA, and they listed their maternal ancestors, so that way I can get an idea of where my maternal ancestors may have lived, may have migrated to, or where I might look for connections. And not only that, but if you've taken an mtDNA test with FamilyTreeDNA, you can also access the match time tree. So these are going to be living people today who share those same haplogroups with you, who are also mtDNA matches to you. You can check them out on the mtDNA matches page. But you can see here that when you click on it, it tells you how you're connected to that person, as well as where you might be in the to the common ancestor. So this again can be a lot of information, because you're talking about a lot of haplogroups here. That can be a long list of H1B1 or, in my case, U5A2D. These are all different subclades. And so to be able to help interpret what that means, because I know it can be a lot of information, I would also recommend that you could check out our suggested projects. Now, these are volunteer-led research projects that focus on specific topics. So in this case, it can tell you more about what your specific breadcrumb trail is telling you, where you fit in the larger picture of things. You can also compare your haplogroup to other people, both ancient, modern, and people in your project, to see how your haplogroup compares. It can give you an idea of where you match up in the database. And then lastly, you can take a look at all of this information that is outlined here on our tree. So this is a bit more of an advanced feature, but it's one that can also give you some wealth of information. So as you can see, this has information that is both valuable for ancient research questions, anthropological questions, as well as things that are relevant to genealogists today in terms of finding connections and furthering your genealogy. So it's definitely awesome. It's definitely worth checking out. Take a look at FamilyTreeDNA. Come check out our booth. Ask us questions. We'll be happy to help. And I hope you have a great day.